Welcome back to the Fire Talk podcast and YouTube channel. For today's video, we're going to be going over MLB.com's top 30 list. Now, this was released either Thursday night or Friday morning. We were planning on doing it yesterday, but want to talk about Nick Martinez's spring training debut, so push it off till today. But going through this list, we're just kind of going to do this, probably not a super long episode, but just going to quickly talk about each of these guys. If you are listening on podcast format, it's probably a little bit more difficult just because you won't see the list. We're going to be pulling up the list in front of us on YouTube. But going to go through this. And then next week, probably the later half of next week, we're going to make our own list, which takes a little bit because you got to do a lot more research into some of these guys. But we're going to do 30 to 21, 20 to 11, and then the top 10 list. So we'll do 3 different segments, 3 different episodes next week on those guys. And we'll go into each of the guys that we have in our top 30. But for this episode, we're going to go through it. We're not going to talk about everyone, but we're going to talk about the guys that we think are going to be the main contributors and whatnot in this list. So I'm going to pull up the list right now. As you guys can see, I think the top 5 was, I think it was pretty clear that it was going to be these guys. Maybe not necessarily in this order, but we all expected C.J. Abrams, Robert Hassel, Luis Campusano, Mackenzie Gore, and James Wood to be a part of that top 5. I don't find there to be any surprises there, but what do you guys think about going through this top 10? Anybody that stands out to you? And Isaac, you can start off.
Somebody that stands out to me, I don't know if any of them necessarily stand out to me. It's kind of what I expected. I didn't expect Rosario to be in the top 10. That's for sure. But right now he's getting some at-bats in spring training. I don't exactly know what his stats are looking like, but I figured they weren't that good. You can definitely tell this is a front-loaded prospect list, a front-loaded system with CJ Abrams up there. Remember last year, I want to say we might have been some of the only people that had CJ Abrams as our number 1 prospect, or as the Padres' number 1 prospect. So now he's number 1. Robert Hassel up there. I thought Mackenzie Gore would be number 2 still, but obviously nobody. It's too early to tell, especially considering he came off some struggles last year. So number 4 makes sense for Mackenzie Gore. But right now it's looking like he might push himself back up there. Of course, they're not going to they'll rearrange it eventually, but Mackenzie Gore is looking really good right now. Luis Campusano, if I remember correctly, I looked at the stats and he was definitely not having that hot of a spring training. I remember the 1 home run he hit was a missile. The swing was beautiful. It was like launch angle galore, but I don't know how he's done it outside of that. And I know he's been brought up so much in trade talks that it kind of feels inevitable, but I'd love to keep him around. James Wood, I expected that. I think he's going to be one of our future outfield stars. And if not a star, then at least just a contributor. Jackson Merrill, I think it's going to be pick your poison. I think one of them will eventually become a trade piece between Jackson Merrill and this other guy we're going to talk about here soon. Eggy, kind of weird. I didn't expect to see him there. Reese Kinnear, saw him a little bit last year. I think he's going to be more of a long reliever. I don't think he'll pan out to be a starter. A long reliever, something in the bullpen, middle inning kind of guy, and I think that'll be good for him. Robert Gasser, somebody that we've talked about a lot. I don't know too much about him. I know Chase likes him a lot. I think Matt likes him a lot too. I don't know much about him. Joshua Mears showed a lot of power in A-ball with the Storm, and I think that's going to continue as he ages, and we've talked about it. He might become a DH. He might become a trade piece. We don't know, but this is kind of what I expected, except for Eggy and Gasser, but very, very top-heavy prospect list for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the only surprise to me is that Reese Kinnear and Eggy are top 10. I know Reese Kinnear had a really good season last year in the minors, jumping up and down. He made his MLB debut. He was somewhat solid as a reliever. He had some iffy outings. I probably would have picked, like a Victor Acosta to go above him, and maybe another guy. I just can't think of them right off the top of my head right now. But yeah, love Robert Gasser being there. I like Joshua Mears. He could be a great DH. If not, he could be a pretty solid corner outfielder. He has the arm, and we've seen the power that he has. The guy can rip the cover off of baseball. And like Isaac was saying, I think Jackson Merrill is going to end up being trade bait. I like Victor Acosta more. We haven't seen a really good switch hitter on the Padres in forever, it feels like. I think the last switch hitter that was somewhat good for us was young Hervis Solarte, and I think that was the last one. I can't remember another guy after that. Uh, I think Mackenzie Gore is still a top 3 prospect. I think he's definitely over Campusano, especially what we've seen this spring. Can't be. The only reason I have him lower is just because we've seen him with the defensive side of the ball. He struggles with it. He struggled this spring training with it so far. The bat's going to play. It's whether or not he's going to stay at catcher, and that's a huge question mark for all of us. I want to see what James Wood could do with a full season in the minor leagues. The guy has so many tools. The guy is fast as he's quick as hell. The guy has power. He is just an athletic freak, and I want to see how those skills translate in game. Eggy, I don't see more as a trade piece, but Robert Gasser, I feel like he could be a big piece in this rotation. In a couple of years. I don't expect anytime soon. Depends on how far he climbs up this year. But from what we've seen, he looks great. His fastball plays, his slider plays, and his changeup plays pretty well too. So I can see him being a back end guy, a 3, maybe a 4 starter in the future. After we get rid of some contracts, would be a perfect time for him to come up and show what he's got. So yeah, that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, so it is interesting. I'm kind of with you guys. I think that you could move Victor Acosta up. I think Aggies a little high. I think Reese Kinnear is a little high as well. I view Robert Gasser, I think, like you said, Chase, is like a potential 3 starter. You look at where the Padres' timeline with their rotation works, and potentially we're going to see Darvish gone in a couple of years, or Snell, or both of them gone. Robert Gasser is a guy that is eventually probably going to take one of those roles. So that's kind of where I expect him to be. In this top 5 right here, I think I'd probably put Mackenzie Gore at 2. I mean, I think so. We're also a lot higher on Mackenzie Gore than most. Not to knock Hassler or Campy, but I just think that Gore has stuff to be a more top end player. Merrill, Rosario, Neer, pretty good. And then I'll kind of go down the list a little bit. We can talk about some of these other guys. Going 11 to like 20 here. Victor Acosta, I think Victor Acosta should already be a top 10 prospect. And the reason why is, you look at this list and, okay, Victor Acosta, 2025, right? The reason Rosario and Reese Kinnear are ahead of him is because their ETA is 2022. What we've seen with a lot of these prospect lists is they really value guys they're close to graduating rather than just ridiculous talent in a guy like Victor Acosta, who's 17 years old, has all the tools in the world to be, a star player down the road, but we've seen such little of him that they're kind of afraid to move him up. You will see when we do our list, he's going to be way up there. So I think I tweeted something out a while back of, outside of the top 10 of this list, who do you guys like the most? You go through it. We got Ray Kerr talked about when I brought that up. We got Kevin Kopps talked about because he could potentially get moved into a bullpen role this year. But for me, and I think for both of you guys, it's probably a no-brainer that it's Victor Acosta, just because he has the chance to be a top 10 prospect in the league, a top 1, the number 1 prospect for the Padres in 2 or 3 years. So it might be a little early with him, but I'm looking at, high-end talent when I look at a lot of these prospect lists, just because there's so many middle-tier prospects that don't pan out and there's top-end prospects that do, but like we've already seen CJ Abrams, he looks like he's going to be great when he gets his opportunity. Fernando Tatis, obviously that's one, but I mean, the shortstops for the Padres that's a position they've really hit on. I think Victor Acosta is like that super young guy right now that is eventually going to get called up and have that role. And I'd also put him probably ahead of Jackson Merrill too, just because I think Jackson Merrill gets a lot of hype because he was a first rounder. But then you look at it and you go, well, James Wood is already ahead of Jackson Merrill. And I think everyone kind of has that as their consensus, that they would rather have James Wood ahead of Jackson Merrill. Not to knock Jackson Merrill, but we've also haven't really seen a ton from him. And he was in rookie ball last year as well. But looking at, outside of the top 10 for me, Victor Acosta, I brought him up. Ethan Elliott, you see this 2022, he could contribute. Kevin Kopps could contribute early on. Reggie Lawson, he's the biggest follower of this list. I think the last list that MLB.com had Reggie Lawson at 6, I want to say. He's at 20, had Tommy John, has had his career pretty derailed, but he's 6'4", 205, and he is a really, really good righty. if he's the same guy he was pre-injury. So a lot of question marks there. Brandon Valenzuela, he's a guy that people have talked about that might make Luis Campusano kind of replaceable just because of how good he is. I think he's a little bit low on this list. Then you got Efrain Contreras. A lot of people like him. Susana. I think we thought that Susana was going to sign last season with the Padres. He just recently signed as an international prospect, right, guys? So that's one that we've talked about him in the past, actually, but I think that's probably where he should be. Super young player, 18 years old. And then you keep going down this list. Adrian Martinez, 2022. He could be a starter this year. There's so many guys on this list. Ray Kerr, this was the guy who was traded for in the Adam Frazier deal. Throws like 100 lefty. He could easily make the roster. So many guys on this list. I mean, I think, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit here with some other segments that we do next week, but we see a ton of pitching depth in this top 30 list and a ton of pitching depth where these guys are ready to graduate this year. They're ready to contribute this year. Ray Kerr, Adrian Martinez, Steven Wilson, Kevin Kopps potentially, Ethan Elliott, Reese Kinnear, right? Mackenzie Gore. There are so many names that are going to be ready as depth this year that I think that the Padres didn't have last year. So I think that's one thing when you're looking through this list, it's, hey, wow, there's like 5 guys that are going to be that can potentially pitch this year. So I think that's the thing that stands out to me the most. But also some guys that just have ridiculous talent, like a Victor Acosta or a Jarlin Susana, Brandon Valenzuela, a lot of guys with a lot of talent. But when you guys are looking outside the top 10, who really stands out to you guys?
Oh, it's definitely Victor Acosta. A switch hitting prospect, only 17 years old, signed as an international prospect. And I remember the first article I read, it was talking about how much hype he was getting. I don't know, I forgot where he's from, but he's getting a lot of hype from where he was from. And he's a really solid ball player. I think, he's only 5'11", 170, but you look at those tools. Remember, he hasn't grown into his body yet. He's only 17 years old. He's the DR. That's where all the good hitters come from. And I mean, you look at Tatis, you look at all the good players that come from the Dominican, and when you're getting hype out of the Dominican, things are good, because quite frankly, a lot of good hitters come out of there, man, and it's respectable. You look at them, and especially growing up, you see all these good hitters, David Ortiz, and a lot of Hall of Famers come from the Dominican. But going back to Victor Acosta, obviously the scouting grades aren't completely there yet, so people will be a little lower than others because, I mean, they're not there, but he's only 17. That power 45, that's going to go up. Wasn't everyone talking about CJ Abrams, how he didn't have a lot of power, and now he's hit 2 or 3 home runs? And I mean, one of them was a foul ball, but I'm going to count it. 2 or 3 home runs in spring training. I mean, the power comes along. It's just a matter of being patient with the prospects. Like I said, only 17 years old, but he's got a lot of upside. I think he's going to be inside our top 7, top 8 prospects, because we're all pretty high on him. He's a switch hitter, but he's going to be a lot of fun to kind of keep track of throughout the years. His ETA is 2025. Obviously, Jackson Merrill's is 2025 also, but I think one of them is expendable. And with the way AJ Preller drafts, the dude drafts like nothing but shortstops. So we'll probably see another shortstop come in the system soon. So one of them is going to be expendable. I think it'd probably be Jackson Merrill just because he's ranked higher and he was a first-round pick. But I don't know, man. It's going to be cool seeing Victor Acosta. I think another person that should get talked about is I wanted to pull up his stats. I totally forgot. I don't even know how to say his name. Yuribel Angeles. How do you spell it? RIB. Here he is. I wanted to pull up his stats just because I remember he had a few hot months last year, right? Oh, you got it. Sick. 301, 320. Last year he hit 329 with what was his on base? 392 on base percentage. He had a good year last year, and I remember seeing a lot about him. So that's another guy you can definitely keep track of. He's also an infielder. I believe he's also a middle infielder. So, I mean, hey, how many middle infielders do we have?
Yeah, we have a ton of middle infielders that, I mean, AJ Preller, when he drafts or goes to the international draft, he goes straight up the middle. Catcher, pitchers, normally left-handed, and then a center fielder. That's sort of where he goes with everything. The guys that I'm like looking at to see what they're gonna do has kind of been Brian Medina. You guys mentioned him, Harlan Sasuna. That guy has talent out of this world. He's throwing around 100 right now. I mean, it's crazy. And then, kind of just a fan favorite of mine, kind of Efren Contreras. I know he was injured last year. He's been dealing with some injuries and everything, but he's kind of been on my eye. I want to see how he comes back and everything. Hopefully he does really good this year.
I think Chase muted because dog's getting a little excited back there. But yeah, I think Chase, you're back home for a wedding, right? So not your typical recording spot here. So yeah, we're gonna talk about these guys a lot. I just kind of wanted to briefly go over the list. I know we're probably gonna talk when we do our top. I don't know where he's gonna land, but Ray Kerr will definitely be in that discussion. We're gonna talk a lot about Ray Kerr, a lot about Adrian Martinez, Brandon Valenzuela, Kevin Kopp. So I'm going to talk more about those guys just because I think that there's going to be longer discussions to be had when we do our own list. But just wanted to kind of show you guys what MLB.com posted as their top 30. And to keep in mind that ours is probably going to look vastly different just because when we do ours, and we did it last year, we had the same kind of idea with it. It's about talent. It's not about ETA. And maybe that plays a slight role when you're looking at who's going to, contribute right away. But I think that when we do ours, it's going to be a lot of these players that are much younger, higher up on the list, rather than, guys like Eggy Rosario or Reese Kinnear that are 7 and 8. But, we all view Victor Acosta as a better player. So we're going to put him higher, it's not going to change because his ETA is 3 years behind. So excited to do this later this week. Really pumped. Going to do some stuff on just like looking into the future of this Padres season, and then we'll do the top 30 list after that later next week. Also, tomorrow we're going to go live on YouTube after the game. So I believe the game starts at 1:40, 1:10, something like that, Pacific time. So probably going to start around like 5. And I'll post that on YouTube, but we're going to go live around 5. And then we're going to start doing these weekly recaps every Sunday after the game. We're going to go live and we're going to talk about, how did this week of baseball look for the Padres? This week, it's going to be a lot about, what is the roster looking like? Who's winning these competitions? So probably talking about the 5 spot a lot. And then, of course, going over any questions you guys have for us. Love doing that. Love doing the lives on Sunday. So want to keep that going and want to get that back rolling because it hasn't been super consistent either. But that's just because, it's been so random with some of these moves. We've been kind of waiting for stuff to happen. But going to be going live pretty much every Sunday throughout the season after those games. And we'll just go over, what did this week of Padres baseball look like? So really pumped to do that. And throughout the season, going to give everyone Padres content daily. So excited for that as well. Really appreciate all the support we've got on our channel. It's been going pretty crazy lately. We were talking about that before we hopped on. Actually, the podcast platform too. People have been listening to the podcast way more. So if you guys haven't checked that out, if you like listening to audio only, it works out pretty well. I know some people had mentioned on Twitter that they listen to it on their run and do stuff like that. So appreciate all the support, guys, and super pumped to be posting Padres stuff daily throughout this season. But with that said, we'll go through our list later this week. Going to be talking about the Padres pitching, their lineup and stuff early next week as well. If you guys want to join the live stream, it should be around like 5 o'clock Pacific time tomorrow. So thank you guys for joining, and we'll be talking Padre baseball all season.